welcome back to Search Sean. This is another Chat with Sean episode, and yeah, we're looking forward to this one. It's going to be a cracker. Few updates as usual, just, simple channel updates. Yeah, all these chats that I have with all these industry experts, obviously we cover such a wide range, talking about jobs today, but the other week I was talking about psychology. But I'm going all over the place, so it's really interesting. But they're all on Spotify as well, so if you prefer Spotify, you can go on there. And generally why we're having this chat today, and obviously I'll introduce my guest in a minute, but the reason we're having this is a couple of months ago, we did a bit of a panel show around digital marketing job trends. Sadly, our guest couldn't make it that day, but it was a great chat, and I'll link to it. You can catch up with that one as well. But obviously this is going to be like an updated version because things probably have moved on since then because the world's just gone mad with AI and whatnot. So anyway, I'll get on with the intro and welcome my guest today, who is obviously James, but James was an SEO for 14 years himself, and now a recruiter of top marketing and founder of withFrontier, and everything search recruitment specialist agency. So yeah, thanks for joining me today, James.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, mate. And yeah, you're right. It's been a long time coming. Sad you missed the last one, but yeah. Pleased to get stuck in today.
Yeah, wicked. And yeah, I mean, the first thing I guess is, we hear these sort of, all these terms, some we can and can't say for copyright reasons. But, search has gone wider now in the sense of it's not so much just focused on the old school search engines as we know. So what does an everything search recruitment agency cover, as a specialist agency? What does that cover?
So ultimately, without wanting to be overly simplistic, but everything search focused, but then I would say 4 or 5 years ago, we'd be talking about paid media, SEO, and content marketing at a push, which of course all three I cover, but heavily cover digital PR as well. A lot more social search as well. So as agencies are starting to offer a lot more social search, a lot more roles are cropping up, or certainly a lot more roles are incorporating social search within the requirements, particularly the strategist roles as well. So I was, as you say, as you alluded to earlier, I was an SEO for 14 odd years, or search as a whole really, which is how I got into the industry. But things have evolved, and there was a period where I was, if I'm completely honest, a little bit shiny new thing syndrome, where I would gravitate more towards kind of e-commerce roles, growth roles, and more creative roles. But I think gradually over the last year or so, I've niched back down, focusing a lot more on search.
Yeah, cool. And later context around this, obviously, like I'm very interested in this because I report obviously on this channel about the latest news in the market, and a lot of the news is sadly kind of doom and gloom, with a lot of companies making people redundant on their masses because they're replacing them with AI solutions, for example. I know personally some friends this week have been made redundant because of cutbacks. So obviously there's cutbacks for that reason. There's also cutbacks because most of the world's economies are doing very badly and companies need to cut back. So yeah, I guess obviously with that kind of there, what are the main trends and sort of impacts you're seeing in the job market right now? And especially like, are you seeing like same level amount of jobs available, or is there been a reduced amount, or maybe more are cropping up? I don't know.
What I will say is, I think there is definitely the economic impact that we've seen. And I think there was a period of about a year ago where the number of jobs were starting to drop off. I would say there's a lot more green shoots at the moment. Certainly agencies are starting to hire a lot more than they previously would have done maybe a year ago. I think the biggest impact really has been at the most senior levels. So we're seeing director levels, we're seeing head of, either made redundant or just less in demand. As things get tighter, nimble, independent agency founders kind of tend to take the helm potentially when it comes to the commercial side of things. So Previously, they might have had a head of that would be responsible for more of the commercial growth element, as well as the people management, as well as kind of the overall department growth. I am seeing there was a period when they were less in demand. It's getting a little bit better now. And I think at the junior end as well, I think certainly at the beginning of the AI hype, I think we did see not necessarily a lot more junior redundancies, although I have seen that, but less requirement, I would say. Now, I do think a lot of it is pretty short-sighted, but I think there's a few things going on. So you've got the fact that it can't be denied that AI can do a certain degree of the entry-level responsibilities. It still requires that human element. But I think in agency land, for example, as they kind of move more towards AI workflow for the fundamental optimizations, for example, for clients or internal efficiencies, they potentially have some of the entry level responsibility covered. So like reporting or that pulling the fundamental reports or basic optimizations, etc. But it does still require that middle management to sense check and humanize it to a degree. But it did for a certain point eliminate more of those entry level roles. I think we're seeing at the senior end of the market as well, less demand, but I think that's more, to be honest, fundamentally down to budgets, constraints, less of a need for somebody to oversee the bigger picture budget, and more need for people that are still finger on the pulse and getting stuck in to the specific channel work. Which, don't get me wrong, there are a good proportion of the senior market that can do that. But what I would say is there's also a good proportion of people that aren't necessarily as finger on the pulse and are suffering a little bit, or understandably not as prepared to be hands on. So I would say those have been the biggest impacts I'm seeing. And I'll see in terms of kind of where people are hiring a lot more is the middle of the market. That kind of 40 to 50K manager level still in demand, particularly at agency level. But yeah, those I would say are the core impacts. And then in addition to that, you're seeing the requirements changing. So as agencies kind of move and transit, as independent specialized agencies are coming through a lot more compared with the more cumbersome, let's say, media agencies and media houses that did really, really well 7 or 8 years ago. They require people to be more commercially minded, client facing, more kind of close touch consultancy than previous at the bigger agencies. So therefore, I would say there's a lot more demand for that on the junior to midweight level now than there would have been previously, which does discount or certainly holds back a proportion of the market that might have spent their time at the beginning of their career at agencies that were set up a bit more like I don't want to say production line, but let's say if we take digital PR and SEO, for example, it was the norm. And to be honest, certainly back in my day as an SEO, to have a certain layer between the delivery teams and the client. So you would have client, of course you would, it's not reinventing the wheel, but you'd have client services and commercial layer on top. And it worked really, really well. But the impact of that meant that there was a whole, I'll say a whole generation and level of marketers that were very good at their craft, but had never had a conversation with a client, never looked at a P&L, never really had to think about whether what they were doing was profitable. It might look great. It might be kind of brief. Maybe have someone handling that for them. Right? But they might get 2 or 3 years into their career and they look on, and when they're interviewing independent specialist agencies, what they're finding is they're lacking the salaries that they understandably are looking for, because it's the natural progression to move up. Doesn't quite match the requirements of the more specialized agencies, which are in higher demand now. Therefore, they're the ones growing and they're the ones hiring. So I would say that's probably another one of the biggest themes at the moment. It's that commercial gap that sometimes people don't even know they have. So when I'm having conversations with candidates on a daily basis, I'll dig into that. And you can, not always, but sometimes tell quite quickly if people skirt around those kind of questions or some. That said, on the flip side, they'll hold their hands up and be really honest about it. They've not really been client facing, but would like to be able to do that. becomes problematic when it comes to salary requirement versus what they can actually deliver and offer. But yeah, I would say those are the core themes at the moment.
Yeah, fascinating. I think it's like, this term's used a lot, but it's like the perfect storm, isn't it? Because we've got the economic climate, which is, as we said before, it's like companies are trying to see where, and this sounds harsh, but kind of those who aren't adding as much value as others, and even though they might be quite impactful in other ways, they have to look at certain measurements and get rid of certain people because they just need to get people out of the building to save money. And then you've got the sort of AI being able to, at a very cheap cost, do certain tasks that the new starters, the executive levels that would come in usually and do those tasks. So it's kind of like bad in both worlds, I guess. And that's obviously what mainly the news has been about, is where people coming out of university with degrees in digital marketing, business management, or whatever, interested to get into it, and there's no jobs around, or there won't be any jobs around to fill their needs. I guess as well, just one thing that came to my mind is, obviously since COVID, we had this whole, not many people going into the office, and obviously talking about, with AI now, it's going to be more about, I guess, more than ever, face to face, and at least over calls and stuff, interaction with clients or whatever, stakeholders. Are you seeing more kind of changes in requirements around going into offices and versus remote? Or
Yeah, I mean, yes. Yeah, the answer to that is yes. I think agencies that were always remote remain. So if they've never been bricks and mortar, that's not really kind of changing. But what I am seeing are where agencies were 5 days and then they might have gone down to 2, they're trying to increase that maybe to 3 or 4, and are feeling that little bit more of an impact. And I think it goes back to what we were saying. I think the biggest reason, it's easy for people to assume it's distrust. And I think, don't get me wrong, in some organizations it is, but I think where they've really struggled is that junior to midweight layer, and progressing them as they become 40, 50, 60 individuals, mostly remote. That's been kind of the biggest gap, because it's those commercial skills, those kind of stakeholder skills, those problem solving skills, and kind of even like conflict resolution. It is tough to instill remotely. People will have my head for saying that, but I do believe it is. There are people that get it right, and just want to say that now. So I'm not saying it's remote equals bad, and because I work for myself and I absolutely love being able to pick and choose when I go in, right? But I do think there's a certain section of the market that's suffering, and then in the long term, it impacts their ability to get that bit more salary, or they manage to get it and they manage to move on, but very quickly they're caught lacking when it comes to certain problems. Do you know what? There's an agency, obviously I won't name them, but well-known e-commerce focused agency that I work with and have done for 4 or 5 years. Well, to be honest, I think it's about 6 years now since they were first founded. They recently had a situation where they looked at their junior level, and those that survived, for want of a better way of putting it, had that additional value to them. So the ability to speak to a client, that ability to take part in a pitch, that ability to support a pitch, be able to shape a strategy based on context and situation and the why, ask the why, and then think about the why whilst you're putting the strategy together. Those people survived and moved, I need to find a better word, but ultimately progressed on to the next stage. Unfortunately, those that didn't have that were let go, and they reduced the number of juniors they had, obviously because they had the workflows in place to do a lot of the rudimental work that they've been doing. So that's a real life example, and it is happening. Obviously you're not going to see it plastered everywhere, but it is. And to be fair, I get it. When times are tough, the bottom line is important. So sometimes junior to midweight individuals that have no commercial ability are almost non-billable in a way, because yes, they're doing the fundamentals, but in this climate, that can be replaced. What can't be is that ability to solve an issue with a client, the ability to communicate effectively so that the client's happy with delays, Um, so yeah. And I would say stakeholder ability now, to be honest with you, like people that want to go from agency to in-house quite often have a bit of a rude awakening when it comes to the stakeholder ability and the ability to play politics and win people over and get people on side. And, that's 50% of the job, the other 50 craft. And I think there is a bit of a gap in that, to be honest with you. Well, it's certainly tougher to find, I would say.
Yeah. No, I think what I was watching a podcast from Advanced Web Ranking earlier, and the guest was just saying like that's kind of since COVID, before that you talk about the water cooler sort of talk, that people used to pick up. But there's definitely a case that when you're in the office environment, you just see and hear things and you learn from it, you pick it up. Like say you do go into a job, and I used to hate calling clients, especially when they were potentially angry. But when you hear your manager or whoever next to your colleague doing it, and you can learn and, different things, you just haven't got that online. You just haven't got that capability. And it's, like yourself, I love the fact that where I work is extremely flexible and I could pick and choose like kind of when to go in. So I definitely don't want to go back to a 5-day working situation in the office, but I do feel like I was very lucky that I went into the market when I did and learned, in many ways, I feel lucky that I was in a generation one. I was in a generation before everything was internet, 24-hour news and social media. I was very happy I know a life before that. I feel sorry for those who don't. And then also I feel lucky that I went into marketing before all this sort of, and not just the office stuff, but just the automation of everything. So I know how to do things manually. I feel like obviously some companies have still got that down like really well, but obviously working from home a lot more is going to naturally kind of make that a bit more fragmented.
I think the other thing to mention as well is that I would say the number of people talk about job hopping, right? And I think, don't get me wrong, like I used to be in the camp of kind of job hopping equals bad. I'm not going to lie, I was very black and white on it, only because I'd had pretty long stints. But actually, having worked the market, you find out there's always reasons for it, or pretty much always reasons for it. But I do think it's exacerbated by remote working as well. So we talked about conflict resolution earlier, or we talked about problem solving. And I do think that certain situations at work can be amplified times 10 if it's dealt with remotely, right? I've heard of horrific things with HR teams and team managers dealing with conflict resolution via Slack instead of actually jumping on a call, let alone getting people into a room, right? And that's more and more common. Or you'll see people going head to head on Slack publicly in project channels now versus getting up, sitting down, going into a room, being able to sit down face to face. So I do think there's an element of people leaving jobs early because of it. And to be clear, I've said it before, this isn't demonizing remote work. I think remote work is fantastic. And I think it's fantastic for so many reasons. It doesn't suit everyone. It just doesn't. That's a fact of life. There are people that would benefit more from working in a business, whether in the office a proportion of the week, certainly in the beginning of their career. Because you know what, if I was fully remote when I first got into SEO, God, I would have been sacked multiple times because there were so many silly scenarios, silly little battles you might get into with colleagues that are resolved in 5 minutes when you sit down. Your manager's also in the room, so they're able to say, "Oh, wait, come in, let's talk about it." It's not going to happen remotely. It might fester for longer before anyone does get to discuss it remotely. So I do think there's an element of that. We were talking earlier about kind of impacts in the current climate. I would say that's one of them for sure. And obviously the impacts of that as a recruiter is that you deal with the fallout for sure. But I'm not ashamed to say that this year, for the first time ever, I've had to pay a couple of refunds, which doesn't sound a lot. Bearing in mind that the last 4 years, I hadn't had to do that. And those refunds were paid and both people left the jobs early. So it wasn't a performance thing necessarily, or yet hadn't got to that, but they'd left because they felt the environment wasn't suited. Now, on the surface, you could take that at face value, but I've been working with these businesses for years. So I knew that they do have a good culture, but that particular individual wasn't really suited to the fully remote working. Two people. So yeah. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, I just agreeing with you. Really, I think I'm also a supporter of remote working, but I do feel like you say, if you are just having conversations like via digital means, in terms of email or Slack or Teams or whatever, text, as we know, through social media and stuff, can be taken out of context so easily. And like you say, you can blow up so fast. And, like say in the office, it'll just be a 2-minute chat. Like, I didn't mean it that way. I was just saying this and that. And yeah, I don't blame it. Like I'm like you, if I probably joined, like, especially some of the harder jobs I've had, and it was just remote and I didn't have those conversations during lunchtime with my colleagues and stuff, I wouldn't have lasted.
No.
And I think it is important. I do think remote can work, but you have to build, you still have to build in elements of face-to-face so they actually meet the real people if possible. And you can, or at least sort out sort of like sessions where you can get to know each other more on a certain level. It hasn't got to be all the time. I'm very much like work focused. I don't want to be in like chitty chatter all the time sort of thing either, but especially just starting off, I think it's like really important that you have that sort of like, culture where you kind of make them feel welcome. It's not just because you can feel, obviously it's called remote working. You don't actually want them to feel remote. You want them to feel part of the team,
Yeah. I think the other thing as well, or just while I'm thinking about it, is there's a lot more pressure in a remote environment as well. Even with client retention, for example, I think the days of being able to build really solid 5, 6, 7 year relationships with clients are on the decline, which, I mean, the impact of that is that obviously agencies are under pressure to win more new business all the time. So I think that also impacts juniors that are coming into the market today. In the beginning, I was at agencies that they might have had a client for about 10 years prior to me getting in there, and they would meet with them regularly. And hey, some of it very old school. You don't need to be taking someone to dinner every other Friday just to maintain an account. But you know what I mean? It's just the other end of the spectrum now. So some clients are onboarded having never met them. And I do think that in that sense, it's more challenging and even more need for people quite quickly in their digital careers to be problem solvers and relationship builders without being able to take them out, being able to read between the lines and work out what's not being said by a client, not just what's being said, what's not being said when it comes to feedback. And, taking a note of that, being aware of it and feeding it back to delivery teams or their wider delivery teams as well, which again can be quite tough to instill remotely or without having that experienced individual next to you doing that day in, day out. So yeah, I'll say, sorry man, going on down a rabbit hole there, but I think, that's another impact, I'd say.
Yeah. I mean, I love going down rabbit holes. As anyone knows watching this channel, no, I do think it's fascinating. And the more I talk about it, the more I kind of feel like I'm going against remote working, but I'm actually not. But
yeah, I mean,
I just feel there's ways that you need to go around it. You have to be very careful, like more than you was. Like you still always, like in person, you still have to be careful because you could still offend someone very easily. You could still not make them feel welcome, even face to face. It's not like it's like always a certainty you're going to be the case face to face. So you all have to take those things into consideration still at this stage. But yeah, the world's just different now. I guess in terms of like, I'm very interested in sort of AI. Obviously we touched upon it a bit. How much of this sort of change would you say is coming from AI? And also, are you seeing changing kind of role demands that incorporate AI, or solely AI focused jobs even at your level?
Yeah, 100%. I think even the junior entry level roles now that I deal with will always dictate that people are able to use or get to grips with the AI for the fundamental optimizations. So less manual work, and the ability to really use AI to drive efficiency with what they're doing basically is one of the primary themes. And then as it goes up in seniority, what I would say is, obviously we know, right? We both know nobody's mastered it yet. There's many people saying they've mastered it, written a book and already completed it, mate. But I think the truth is, what's important is people are curious about it. And that's what I'm seeing in job descriptions now and requirements. People that are experimenting already and they're curious and they found some things, whatever that might be. It's that thinking of tomorrow, next week, next month, next year with it. I think that's key. So there's no denying it's important now, but I wouldn't say, certainly not what I'm dealing with, I wouldn't say that there are many jobs out there that are laser focused on it yet. Maybe edging more towards it or incorporating it 50-50 with traditional SEO. But yeah, I mean, in terms of how it's impacting other things, I think it's making recruitment a lot harder for internal teams and hiring managers, because on the flip side of it, you've got AI generated CVs. You've got people that are writing their entire CV with AI, and which isn't always easy. But don't get me, there are tools that you can use. But ultimately, if you were a HR team, it's not always easy to spot, and it is gameable. And then people can ultimately get through the process with those CVs, but they're wasting so much time pushing these through to hiring managers, and then it being made aware that ultimately these CVs might tell a great story, but there's not much to back it up. I think the ability to apply for jobs very, very quickly on LinkedIn via their kind of quick AI function, again, is leading to like thousands of applications for each job, which again really bogs down the internal teams. So I'm seeing a lot more HR teams and hiring managers coming to me saying, listen, this has been open 4 or 5 months. We've had a deluge of AI written CVs. We're not going to get through the rest of them. Now we want you on it, which is never ideal, because obviously when a role's open that long, you're always on the back foot. But I think that would be another impact. Then we spoke about it before. There is more of a dip in entry level. No, for sure. I'd actually go as far as to say it's a pretty tough industry to get into from scratch. No, unless you know people. It sounds awful. It makes it sound like the film industry or something. But ultimately, it does come down to being introduced to people now. I do it, but people generally wouldn't use me as a recruiter for an entry level or an exec role anymore, because there are a lot of them and just a lot less opportunity. So I would definitely say there's been a dip in that. I would say there's a lot of the SEO roles that previously would have been content heavy started to dip a bit, in my opinion, very short-sighted. I think we'll see that come back around again. For example, copywriters and content writers had a pretty good time of things about 4 years ago. Years prior to that as well, but up to about 4 years ago, they were heavily in demand. SEO teams would command content strategists that didn't necessarily need to be SEOs outright. They're just very, very good copywriters. Copywriting was booming, but I think, with AI has pushed some of them out of the market, certainly a good proportion. As I say, though, my prediction is it will come back around again, but as people will need to be proficient with the basic AI tools in order to drive efficiency with what they're doing. But yeah, those are the fundamentals. I would say in the next couple of years, we definitely will see far more laser focused geo. I still don't really like the term, but geo-focused roles. Of course, it's going to happen, but at the moment, it's just a blend. It's a blend and a need to consider it, I would say, in the fundamentals. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, I think, it's going to be interesting to see where AI go, because I have no evidence behind this, but I feel like companies still at this stage don't really know how they're going to incorporate AI and what it all means and how they're going to leverage it and that kind of thing. So I don't think they even know like how they're going to shape their business in accordance to AI, in terms of using it internally as a tool or such. and two, also how you're going to be more visible and seen in the search engines or whatever. So yeah, interesting. And do you think, how about technical SEO? Because, you know, a lot of people are saying that's with the large language models and that, so capable of coding and stuff now. Platforms like Wix are integrating AI into their platforms, you know, to fix things or whatever. We're not quite there yet, but they're starting to integrate AI. I'm sure, you know, they will do that kind of thing in future. Yeah. Have you seen a dip or anything in terms of technical jobs?
I'm not seeing a dip yet. Well, that said, actually, I would say there's been a little bit of a dip in isolated technical SEO roles, but that, to be honest, began when the economic climate changed and people needed to be more commercially savvy in addition to being technical. So people that are having a good time with it right now are technically minded, but also able to have a commercial conversation. I wouldn't necessarily attribute it to AI yet in terms of a dip, but I can see how it would. But what I will say is I think, like with a lot of things, people that will do well, technical SEOs that will do well in a world of AI would be people that are, again, for want of a better way of putting it, they almost become like solutions architect, which is a term that gets banded around. And what I mean by that is they would be somebody that knows when AI has messed up, basically, right? Which sounds so ridiculously basic, but they're going to use AI for what they need to be using it for, but they still need that human element. They still need that technical brain. They still need to be able to make sure, because actually a world where AI is handling all of the fundamentals of everything from site architecture to even building out an entire website, I find that scary, if I'm honest. You're always going to need that human to check it. So I think if somebody has that ability, in addition to the commercial awareness and the stakeholder skills and the client skills, then they will do well as a technical SEO.
Yeah, it's difficult as well because the goalposts have changed all the time. You know, 2 years ago, if someone said, you know, when this all kicked off, what do I need to do? What do I need to be? They were saying be a prompt engineer. Then it was like be a data analyst. And now AI has all that sus pretty much. So it's like now, you know, but I do believe, I agree. Like, I think, like what you're saying, and definitely the solution side of it. You know, I just had a chat with, and it'll probably be out before this one, but John Goody, and he's great at automation, AI, and building solutions and tools and stuff using AI. And yeah, and that kind of thing, you know, you're going to have to be a bit more savvy until, who knows, like I say, tomorrow, AI could be basically, if they can do all that and then check their own homework pretty efficient, then there's no need for any human intervention, possibly. I don't know how far we are from that. Do you think AI generally, and I know we focus on AI, I know there's other things, like climate and all that, and I guess we'll take that into account. Are you seeing reduction in general wages, salaries? Because, you know, I mean, I look at jobs just for those people say, I have heard that for like higher end jobs, let's say, that the average salary is a lot less than it was, say, 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, 100%. But I think there's a few reasons for that. So the COVID bubble pushed salaries right up. And I think as demand boomed and the desperation to get people on board as agencies were growing rapidly, brands were growing rapidly due to VC backing around kind of COVID times, but also everyone had money in their pockets. That pushed salaries up for sure. Then what we started to see around 22, 23 was salaries leveling out that look. So to some, it was dramatic. It was a dramatic drop, but generally speaking, what I saw was, okay, it was kind of being a bit more realistic. But now I would say the last year or so, yeah, a head of department, to be honest, that might have commanded 80, 85, 3-4 years ago is probably about 65, 70 now. Do I think that's right? Maybe not, but it's ultimately P&L matching, isn't it? It's down to kind of the climate. Obviously, there was other things at play as well. So the national insurance increases as well came into that. So yeah, I definitely salaries are down. I mean, there was a point where kind of 2 or 3 years experience could get you 45 grand just after COVID. With that, I would say that's kind of dropped by about 5 now. There's always edge cases. You get people with that and this is what I'd always advise people, by the way, somebody's got that commercial ability combined with just a natural stakeholder ability, and they've got a couple of years experience, so they're kind of gaining experience with their craft. All of a sudden it's a different conversation, isn't it? But yeah, salaries are down, I would say, as a whole.
It's interesting because when you compare America versus UK doing the same job, even at like large organizations, it's nowhere near. It's crazy how like America's climate, okay, I mean, you don't know what to believe these days about it, but it's not that much. I mean, we've all gone like having these problems since COVID and stuff, and yet they're still paying good money. It's it's interesting, and I'm sure the demand is extremely high in America. But yeah, in terms of like the CV, because you said obviously a lot of people are using AI to kind of generate it. I must admit, like when I have been hiring in the last few years, the CV is a good basis to kind of get a general idea about the person and their history and stuff. I try and base it more on the conversations I have with the person and the rapport and the general feel I get from if they're going to fit in, even not so much the knowledge, because you can gain knowledge, you can gain learning about processes and stuff, but you have to have a certain sort of, personality or whatever, in that sense. So how powerful is the CV still, would you say, and how much effort should you put into it these days?
Do you know what? It's funny because my honest opinion is it has a lot less impact. I think it can only tell so much of a story, and ultimately it can also lead to pedigree bias. Somebody refers to this pedigree bias, where someone might just scan read it and just see where you've worked versus the intricacies of your experience. That's my opinion. That said, what I would say is a lot of hiring managers still ask for them because ultimately it's a point of reference when they're having a conversation. So doing yourself justice on your CV can serve you well when it comes to those first conversations, because there's more talking points, there's more things, and people are human, right? Not everyone might have fully read your CV before chatting to you first time. Should they have? Absolutely. But I think the reality is, as people are stretched, it might be their first point of actually looking. They've progressed you, it might be their first point. So, but that said, what I will say, and it goes back to what we were saying before, LLMs and AI and how it's affecting the recruitment space. What I say to people is that in addition to your CV, if you can get yourself a portfolio website done, do it. If you can get yourself video content around yourself and showing what you can offer and deliver and any experiments you're doing, get those on LinkedIn, get those on Instagram, get those out there basically, because ultimately that's going to serve you well. It's going to represent you far better than a piece of paper ever can. But by the same token, as I say, it will certainly benefit you going forward when it comes to being found in LLMs. And I think there are specific platforms within recruitment now. There's one called Manus, for example, that ultimately is almost like a deep research tool, where if there was a particularly niche set of skills and one of those jobs where it's going to be one out of maybe 4 candidates that you're going to be able to find for this because it's so niche, these tools can help, provided you prompt it well enough, right? But point of that is, the only way you're going to come up there, doesn't matter how good you are, is that you put yourself out there, right? And you've got a bit of a presence and a bit of a footprint. So again, the message there is don't rely on the CV over that. The other thing I would say is as well, increasingly brands and agencies want sort of like a Loom video introduction of people as well. Now, I'm a big believer that is a good thing, but equally what I do hate is when it's used as a first point of contact. So someone will send a video before they'll even before they're even going to be able to open the door to speak to someone internally, which isn't right, because it kind of leads to all number of biases and stuff. But I do think it's a good thing as part of a process, whether that be a practical task complete with Loom video once you kind of met them and they're into second and third stages. So I feel like I've taken you right around the houses there, but ultimately the point I'm trying to make is there are so many other things that are just as important, if not more important than CVs, but don't think CVs are redundant, because unfortunately not every HR department and internal team is it is up with the times, and they will be relying on it. So yeah, it'd be interesting in 2 or 3 years. So I'd be interested to see where we're at, because I do think they're being phased out, but at the moment they're pretty integral.
Yeah, interesting points. And I think like the best way to do it is kind of that first. I still see CVs are important, so on that side, but like especially on the first sort of filtering stage, very important to see these certain markers of where they have worked and stuff. Like I say, it's all in context, because you can work somewhere amazing and then there's more detail about it actually isn't as amazing as what the company says, who they are. But also it's important to make sure there's no biases there. So try and eliminate any form of biases on that, especially, well, throughout the journey, ideally, but especially on that first filtered stage. And yeah, it'd be interesting, because I guess more organizations will in some form use AI to filter through things. And obviously the AI will pick up on certain terms and, like you say, skill sets and stuff. And I think it'd be interesting in future. I could see this really being the case where, like you say, your digital footprint would be a lot more impactful, because the AI will be able to go out and look at your socials. They'll be able to go and look at your videos on YouTube. They'll be able to go and look at all these different things. I mean, it's scary in a way, because it means you'll be watched in all different ways. I can see that happening, because that's what it is capable of. So, yeah.
100%. And I think, to be fair, it lends itself to what the other thing that I'll always tell people is, when it's a market like this, it just pays to stand out. So there's never any harm having something like a portfolio website you regularly update. And if I think back to time as an SEO and a content marketer, the amount of projects that I really enjoyed being involved in, and I think would be proud to look back on, that there are no traces out there anymore. Because I kind of, we're talking, I'm old, mate, so we're talking about 2008 through to 2017-ish. So there's a lot out there that I took for granted that I think that's all right. I'll Google it. I'll Google the results for that, and I'll be able to pull that together when I need it. But yeah, it's not out there forever. So I think regularly updating some formal website, basic website portfolio, I think should be done anyway. Whether you're paid media, whether you're SEO, whether you're content, whether you're data, the more experiments you do in, document them, because they're going to serve you in the long run when it comes to the way recruiters search for people now. So yeah.
And I think it's also like, it's important to say not everyone like feels comfortable going in front of a camera or doing. I mean, I definitely didn't. That's for sure. So it's only recently that I had the courage to go and do this, but I totally get it. So there are other ways you can show that. Like you say, you can build a blog and show case studies. You can build like a Slack channel. You could build like a Reddit forum. You could build. There's so many ways you could like have conversations or produce content and stuff, that a Medium blog, whatever it is. Like so yeah, and you can obviously do audio only. There's ways around it. I guess obviously it was like kind of to finish off in a way. I guess I know you got a couple more, then I'll let you get. How do people, like digital marketers, kind of improve their chances potentially of getting a job in the future? You touched upon obviously some of those things. Do you think like there's certain areas they should be looking at more than others? Obviously communication, like has been a clear one, communication skills, but do you, that's kind of what came out of that panel show. The soft skills is the one that people are kind of looking for more than ever. But do you think like people should be like, say playing around with AI programs? They should be looking at different forms, like being a bit more creative, maybe looking at, video creation, tool creation. Yeah. Well, I'm interested to hear what you think.
Yeah, I think to be fair, everything you just mentioned, 100%. I think obviously we mentioned AI a few times, but they definitely need to start being more AI literate. But thinking about it in terms of the pain points that AI would solve for you in the career that you want to pursue, right? So thinking ahead on that. and just familiarizing yourself. And as we said earlier, nobody's cracked it, but I think the more experienced, exactly like SEO in 2005, 2006, right? People that experimented, people that made mistakes and put things together, took them apart, broke them. Those were the ones that basically progressed and were able to learn their craft on the job. And that's the same. So I would definitely say be more AI literate. Definitely the commercial. We've touched upon that a few times, so I won't go into that too much. Stakeholder ability, because it's always been the case that people need to have stakeholder skills and tactful communication and the ability to think like others would in a scenario to get what you want to achieve. It sounds so obvious to say out loud, but actually I've been guilty of it in agencies of not doing that and getting away with it because you were just responsible for your deliverable. And your manager might just be responsible for the deliverable of that channel. So you never see the wider picture. So for want of a better way of putting it, that full funnel thinking. So you don't need to be good at every single channel by any means, but understand what motivates each channel, whether that be you might want to go in-house and you're part of an internal team. So you need to know what makes people tick, which again sounds so obvious, but I personally was guilty in-house of not doing that. I've just focused on my own SEO deliverables and KPIs. My manager did exactly the same. Paid media did their thing. Nothing was ever lined up. So yeah, it's that without wanting to go into that too much. What I would say, actually, another way of looking at it is niching or picking up another channel in order to become more growth focused and funnel focused. So by that, what I mean is, right, the average SEO who's agency side might do, unless they're a specialist agency, but they might do an even mix of B2B and e-commerce, right? Which is great and it makes sense and it's good to kind of have a good breadth, or certainly has been good to have a good breadth of experience. But I think the agencies, if you wanted to go down the agency route, that are doing really, really well right now are the independent specialist, laser-focused agencies that might be doing e-commerce specifically, e-commerce within Shopify and WooCommerce, for example. Or there could be SEO agencies that primarily deal with law and B2B and fintech, and that's their thing. That's what they're good at. That's what they're known for. But if you kind of diluting yourself doing a bit of e-commerce, a bit of this, then sometimes you could be a difficult prospect to select for those agencies that you want to be at, right? So it's not always easy, but if you can engineer ways or plan your next move based upon it, right, and just working towards that step. If you want to go down the e-commerce route, go in on it hard. Start getting through it to Shopify. Shopify more than ever, because agencies are very regularly now moving brands from, say, WooCommerce or Magento to Shopify, for example. So that's not a new thing, but it's certainly becoming more and more. Or you might be a paid media person that, again, does this even mix, but you gravitate far more to the lead gen, demand gen side of things, and that way of thinking. Therefore, think about your next move and start to laser focus on that. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, sounds obvious, but not everyone does it, particularly agency world, is just pick that niche and then work towards it. Because I do think we're going to see, and we're already seeing it, a rise in agencies that really, really niche down, really narrow. There's even agencies cropping up just catering for one specific niche of e-commerce, right? So home and gardening, for example, or law. So that'd be the first thing I'd say. But then on the flip side of that, what I would say is people that you might be an SEO, and if you start to gain more of an understanding of paid media on more of a granular level, all of a sudden you are more growth focused, and there are a lot more growth manager roles out there, head of growth, growth director, somebody that can oversee multiple channels. They don't need to be an expert in all, but if you've got the SEO, paid media side of things, CRM and retention as well, you've got those three, or certainly enough of those three to be able to do a good job overseeing the strategy and pulling in the right team to do what you need to do, or whether that be agency, then that is the way to go as well, because there are more roles cropping up, and that's for multiple reasons. It's more control, less cumbersome marketing teams at a time when the bottom line is important and kind of wage bills are needing to be reduced. But also it's just that growth mindset is what every e-commerce brand needs right now, given the fact that earning and scraping every penny is getting harder for them. So yeah, again, I feel like I've taken you right around the houses, but well, those are the things that I'm talking about on a daily basis with people, I would say. And that's what I would do. First was to start again as an SEO. I mean, I'm a recruiter now and far more enjoy that. But if I was to start again as an SEO, I'd pick a niche. But I wouldn't have known that at the time, but I kind of wish I did, I think.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think definitely the commercial side, like I think that is, like you say, in the past, it's been very easy to kind of, when things weren't as tough as they are now, it's a lot easier to just, there was just one person who kind of dealt with that and you kind of crack on with your to-do list or whatever. And, but now, you know, sooner or later, probably someone's going to come knocking and ask how your department or whatever are contributing to the bottom line. If you have a lot more awareness of that, the quicker and the better you can answer that question. And yeah, definitely take an interest. Obviously, there's enough to get on with SEO if you work in SEO, or if you work in paid, there's enough to work on with that, paid social or PPC or whatever. There's so much going on in all those different areas. But if you can just take some time out every week, like what I do is kind of on ChatGPT, I just do like a deep research to tell me about the latest in other channels that I'm not really involved in. Just have some knowledge. And then when you hopefully you are meeting with the other stakeholders who look after those channels, you have some sort of knowledge about what's going on in their world. And obviously you can talk about those things and make sure you meet up there. So yeah, I think that's definitely spot on. And in general, are you seeing any trends between up and down in different areas? Like I would presume, like a lot of people in the sector are saying that in the SEO world that digital PR is going to obviously boom again because of, what's going on. And in the paid world, is there any sort of like areas that are booming more than others?
Yeah, so what I would say with digital PR is it's a funny one, because obviously there's this notion that it died off for a little bit and now it's seen a resurgence, and it definitely is with clients. I can totally see why. Obviously it's a new lease of life again. But I would say the number of roles have been pretty consistent. Am I seeing more now that obviously kind of the new angle and LLM exposure, etc.? Yeah, maybe a little bit. But what I would say is it never really drops off. But that might be because ultimately that's an element, that's pretty much what I used to do for years. So therefore, a lot of people do come to me. So I do get a lot of those roles in, and I've filled 5 or 6 in the last couple of months, agency and brand side. But we're set to see more for sure. And actually, I think we might see a bit of a resurgence of the junior level roles coming back again, because there was a point where they were cut in favor of more managerial or slightly more senior individuals that can get stuck into delivery, but also have the client conversations and do the upsells and client facing. So, but yeah, I definitely would, to answer your question, I definitely would, and I envisage there to be more digital PR roles in the coming months. Agency side and brand side, probably more agency side to be fair. Paid media, I would say it's been fairly consistent. I'm seeing a lot more on the paid social side of things and the creative focused for paid social. I would say the shift has been just more people that are keeping up with the current platforms and the current requirements within specific industries, though within e-commerce, PMAX, which is contentious. People kind of argue for and against, is in demand more than ever, I would say, people with PMAX experience. But generally speaking, I would say paid media roles are on the up. I know that there's all this talk and hype around the fact that AI is about to change the world forever, and maybe it will, but at the moment, I'm not seeing it. A lot, like I say, a lot more on the creative and paid social side. But yeah.
Interesting. And before we finish off, in terms of job security and pay, agency versus in-house, is there sort of any trends happening there? Like agencies paying more, but people aren't staying as long. I'm like, what? Is there any sort of like trends you're seeing there or not really?
Yeah, it's an interesting one to be fair. Do you know what I would say? I think job security wise, I wouldn't say there's anything that separates the two. I would say when it comes to a recession, for want of a better way of putting it, I think job security is a bit just as dicey in both sides of the coin in that sense. I would say salaries are better in-house. They've dropped, but they are better in-house for sure. But I think that's always been more down to the fact that there's more to it than just the craft. It's that stakeholder ability. It's the ability to educate internally on, so you're repping the channel. Yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question or not, but what I would say in terms of stability, I think they're both pretty much the same. Probably a bit more volatility when it comes to agency, but then maybe potentially that's more because ultimately there's a hell of a lot more agency roles, right? And a lot more agency people. So therefore, the more people, the more roles, the more likely there are people to leave, just from a numbers perspective. So I do see that more in agency role, but I do think that's just because there's more of them. And also, I guess there's less loyalty in agency land these days, I think. As a lot of the roles become the same role, just in different organizations, it just comes down to if one's offering remote and they really want that remote opportunity, or if get more money. But yeah, hopefully that answers that. But I wouldn't say there's anything really to distinguish between the two. I guess to look at it this way, in-house are less inclined to hire when things are a bit tighter. From what I've seen, they're more inclined to go to an agency because ultimately agency relationships now, they can put a 6-month contract on that, or 3-month contract on that, versus an employee that they're paying national insurance on, and a lot tougher to kind of deal with if ultimately the money isn't there to pay the salary. So there's definitely a lot more agency roles.
And obviously you see on LinkedIn a lot, and back in the day, it used to be that the digital marketing manager or whatever was expected to do literally everything. And then it kind of like, people got split up and they're more specialist in whatever it was. And some are now posting on LinkedIn like examples of, the SEO manager also should be good at Photoshop and doing social posters stuff, just random stuff that usually isn't in that remit. Like, are you seeing more of that? Or
yeah, no, I definitely have. But a lot of that was in the startup world. And you can kind of see how those conversations happen, really. There'll be a founder who's not necessarily digital savvy. There'll be a HR team that are tasked with building out the structure and kind of putting out the jobs, and not necessarily digital savvy. So kind of just looking at ways to maximize what they're going to get without really thinking about that. So yeah, but it's in the more kind of established businesses, that's when they'll be splitting out the marketing team. So no, I can see where you're coming from. There was a resurgence of it. I think the best way to put it is, if I was faced with that, I would just say to them that ultimately this isn't achievable. If you want me to work with this, we're going to have to look at it from this perspective. And do you know what? That could go either way. They could tell me, do you know what, mate, do one, because there's 50 other recruiters that will say yeah, or they'll listen. But so yeah, that's the honest answer to that. But no, I don't doubt it still happens. I can see why. Money saving / just sort of a lack of full understanding of the value of what they're actually hiring and the support of business. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. Naivety and just kind of, maybe just trying to cut costs, but not cutting the, production. And just to finish off then, last one, in terms of like, if you are in a current role and you're worried about the future of your role, not if you're doing a bad job maybe, but because everything else in the world going on, how do you reduce your anxiety in terms of like making yourself stand out? Like, what can you do to kind of make sure you future-proof yourself? I know we covered some stuff, but is there that one closing kind of statement that you would say?
I will say, one that I've not really mentioned yet is really, really, really identify and turn up within community, within your space. Because ultimately, within those communities, let's take the Women in Tech SEO community, for example, one I'm involved with and I sponsor regularly, but there are others as well within the e-commerce community as well. There's that huge Slack groups, and there are mentors within those communities that are more than happy to bestow their wisdom. There are people that regularly kind of will knowledge share and help each other out, but also it's just great networking. So in a way, what I think and what I would certainly owe a lot of my progression to as a marketer, but also my ability to build the business, is networking within niche community. just making really, really solid contacts and proving how valuable you are to them first and foremost. That's one thing I will say. It's give and take. There are some people that join communities and just expect to be spoon-fed. It's give and take. I think that's actually a massive future-proofing one, because you become known in the right circles. You are able to demonstrate your value potential within a community that is massively applicable to what you're looking to progress in. So yeah, don't underestimate community, basically, I would say. And then obviously we've got everything else we spoke about, from commercial to, but I feel like I've done that to death. But I would definitely say, if you're not within community, within SEO, or if you're a paid media. So for example, within paid media, there's PPC Live, which is a community that's been set up, and regular events by an awesome lady called Anu. I can share on these links after. Within the ecom community, there are things like the Ecom Collab Club as well, that's put on regularly. There's an agency called Vivon that I know really, really well, good friends with, and they put on a regular conference called Pulse. These places are like gold dust to building the right relationships. I mean, some of my best clients today as a recruiter were people that I got to know as an SEO, and they kind of got to know me as a person as well. So yeah, that's what I would say in short.
I mean, doing this show, I've just realized that how many in the industry are willing to kind of help out, you know. And when I had like two subscribers, and that people are taking their time, just even now, like anyone taking their time to come and talk to me, I'm so appreciative, because, you know, I have been in the industry a while, but I still learn from every single conversation. And like, there's some good places where you go and get like the knowledge, like in terms of good signals, office hours, you know, every Friday do like a live show. You can get involved and chat with people there. So yeah, I'll just finish up and thank you, James. This has been actually really, really fascinating. I think we've covered a lot in today's chat. So yeah, I really appreciate it.
Hopefully I haven't rambled too much there, and definitely guilty, but yeah, and I'm glad we got to it. And yeah, no, thanks for asking the questions. I think that's what's made it.
Cheers, mate.